Alright, so I'm going to be refuting Scott Adams' claim. If you remember, he made the claim where he said that raising the minimum wage has a negative effect on the economy. His first secondary claim was that raising the minimum wage hurts business. His second supporting claim was that raising the minimum wage will increase the cost of living for almost everyone. His third secondary claim is that raising minimum wage will negatively affect employment. I'm going to spend most of my time refuting the first claim, that it hurts business, because I think his second two claims are really a result of business hurting. If businesses don't profit, they're going to react to that by increasing the cost of their products, increasing the cost of living. If businesses don't profit, they will fire workers. So I'm going to spend most of my time on the first claim. So some background, the federal minimum wage is $7.25. A person working 40 hours a week makes about $15,000 per year. This puts that individual well below the poverty line. Pro-minimum wage increase arguments generally hinge around the ethics of allowing 45% of Americans to live in poverty as a result of these wages. Scott has left out the ethics in his argument, and that in a way makes it a little biased and irrelevant. So my challenge to his first claim that it hurts business, his evidence is weak. This is a big claim. It's what his second two claims really hinge on, so it should be supported really well. And he used a quote. His main source of evidence was a quote from Tribune Business News, where he said that business can barely survive any kind of wage increase because small businesses have very thin profit margins and are the least likely to be able to absorb a significant increase in their labor costs. I mean, that's a pretty generic statement. Not much statistics were provided, and he used the word thin, that they have thin profit margins. I think that is a relative statement because it's thin relative to what? I mean, Walmart profits about $15 billion per year. Thin relative to that is still pretty good, and they likely would have enough money to allow their workers to live a comfortable life. So his reasoning on this argument, I think this argument is a little irrelevant because he leaves out the ethics of it. Of course, businesses would flourish with cheap labor. I mean, it'd be easier to start a small business and maintain a small business, any business, if the labor is cheap or free. The economic implications of that should be argued, and it wasn't. The bottom 50% of workers in this country have seen their income percentage decrease from 20% to 12% of the entire income in this income gained in this country since 1980. A major reason for this is that minimum wage has lagged behind the cost of living and inflation. Since 2009, 2009 was the last time the minimum wage was increased. The cost of living has increased 20%. So inflation has gone 20%, and there's been no increase in minimum wage. Our economy currently allows most of the wealth to go to the top 1% of individuals. And I would argue that's not a good economy, that's not a healthy economy. So just because businesses are allowed to flourish and the business owners are allowed to do well, doesn't mean that our economy is good. The wealth currently is because the wealth is going to the top 1%, that money is being sit on, it's being put into savings accounts. And it's not being put back into the economy. This creates a stagnant economy. It is for this reason that many small business owners actually support a minimum wage increase. The American Sustainable Business Council ran a poll that 61% of small business owners support a $3 minimum wage increase. Scott implies that the minimum wage increase will make employment costs too high for businesses to profit. The large majority of minimum wage workers are employed by large businesses, actually. Small business owners generally pay their workers above the minimum wage because they're forced to personally interact with the worker. It is of course easier to allow workers to live in poverty if you never interact with them on a daily basis. So just Walmart employs the most minimum wage workers. They employ 1.4 million minimum wage workers, and they profited $14.7 billion in 2016. So my counterclaim, I'm right at that. My counterclaim is that raising the minimum wage will actually help the economy. Increasing the minimum wage from $7.25 to $10.10 would inject an estimated $21.1 billion into the economy. Income inequality is a problem. Income inequality is a problem for the economy. Currently, we have an income in which most of your wealth goes to the top 1%. Working class workers spend their income on goods needed to survive, while wealthy individuals place their income in personal savings accounts. It does make economic sense to pump some of this wealth back into the working class families by increasing the minimum wage.
All right, well, you set up the structure pretty clearly, although you admittedly aren't going to talk about the second and the third point to any degree. It's all going to focus on that first point, suggesting that there's a chain of arguments here and that that's the the key link in the argument. You've got basic information, background information about the minimum wage. That's okay. You do argue that the ethics get left out. Well, it is supposed to be a claim of fact. The question of ethics concerns whether or not something is right or just, not whether or not it has a particular economic effect, for instance. So I think that maybe you get a little sidetracked on that issue, which we would if a policy argument was involved. But since we're talking primarily about what the impact would be, I think maybe that call for more discussion of whether or not it's right or just is probably a little out of place. You challenge the evidence that the advocate presents on the first point, and you do have a direct claim that says the evidence is weak. And then you basically kind of repeat what the advocate's evidence said, which is not a bad thing. We should know what the argument is. But your basic argument about it being weak is that thin is a relative term, and that's about as far as you go on it. And you mentioned Walmart as a comparison. Now, the truth is, I think you have an argument that you make toward the end of the speech that might work a little bit more effectively right here, where you say that Walmart is the largest employer of minimum wage workers and that they are making a substantial amount of money. That, I think, is the better argument to be making on this particular point, because that really addresses the question of whether or not the people who are having a problem are or paying the minimum wage are at the margins, and it doesn't sound like Walmart is at the margins. We get another challenge about the ethics. There was a figure talking about how there's been a decline in the income of people since a particular period of time. I didn't quite understand what the statistical information was that you were presenting there. I did understand the information when you talked about since the last increase in the minimum wage, there's been a 20% cost of living increase, so that makes sense. But the other one, it wasn't very clear what it was, what inference we should be drawing from that. Then there's some assertion about that most of the wealth goes to the top 1%. There's no evidence that I heard that was presented on this. The data, I think, needs to be a little bit clearer. The closest you come to anything is that argument, again, at the end about Walmart. But, of course, Walmart employs 1.4 million people. So that's, if we're just talking about the owners of Walmart, yeah, but that seems like a lot of people that make up Walmart, too. So I don't know exactly how you would break that down, but I think that that's that's kind of going to be your default evidence on most of these points. You did have one statistic that said, or one piece of information that talked about small businesses wanting to be able to increase the minimum wage, and I think that that's a reasonable argument, although if small businesses want to pay more, it's called a minimum wage. Why is do they feel limited to paying the minimum? Anybody can pay more if they want to. I'm not exactly sure why that's a good argument on this particular point. Let's see. And then you did have one final argument, exit kind of a counterclaim argument, suggesting that we would increase the amount of money in the economy by increasing the minimum wage, and that's a reasonable counterclaim to be making at that point too. All right, thank you.